Hey, True Believers, Englentine here with another episode of Comic Book Origins. This time we are doing the first black female superhero, so long as you don't remember Misty Knight appeared just a couple of months before her. Yeah, I know, a lot of people do believe Storm is the first black female superhero for Marvel Comics. Sorry guys, she's not even the first black female superhero for Marvel, and even before that you had Nubia in DC, so yeah, it doesn't quite fit. And even before Nubia, you had Butterfly over in Hellrider, an independent comic. But anyway, we're not talking about them, we're talking about Aurora Monroe, created in 1975, released in May, guys, Giant Size X-Men #1. Written by Len Wein, drawn by Dave Cockrum, and you may be saying, Englentine, why don't you just do the whole X-Men? That's because I think Nightcrawler and Colossus, and maybe even Thunderbird, deserves their own entry in this particular series. So I'm going to focus on her appearance in Giant Size X-Men #1, but then going to focus on her origin, which came just a few issues after that. There may have been some retcons to that particular origin, but we're going to go back to the beginning. This is all about comic book origins, not secret origins, so I like to see where the comic book superheroes and villains started. So, let's see, I think that's just about enough of the introductions. We'll let this picture pass by because, damn. Yeah, anyway, let's get started, and we're going to be talking about Giant Size X-Men #1. We're also going to check out X-Men 102 and 103 for her origin story. It should be a good time, so without further ado, let's get this party started. A classic cover. This is a reprint. You can tell by the TM 2005 on the bottom, but this is flawless. You've got the new X-Men bursting through the pages, or the cover of a older X-Men comic book. You have Cyclops on both sides, representing the fact that he will be leading both teams. It's a perfect concept, and it's very well executed. Once again, nearly flawless cover. Love it. Although I wonder, now this is more representative. Of course, you've got all the new X-Men right here. You've got the splash page. The same thing, the older X-Men are above them. The new X-Men are running towards us. It says, the grandeur and the glory begin anew with Second Genesis. Would this have made a better cover? Because in all honesty, I don't think it would. Still, it's just really good art. We got Len Wein writing, Dave Cockrum drawing, Slying Wine colorist, and John Constanza is the letterer. Okay, for this part, I'm going to ask you guys to please forgive me. This is the origin of Nightcrawler. At least this is the first appearance of Nightcrawler. And I'm not going to be talking about this now because eventually I'm going to get to his comic book origins. And that's when we're going to focus on his involvement in this book. So for now, we're just going to let this pass by and go right on over to Wolverine. Obviously, this isn't his first appearance. That was in the Hulk. But here, this is the first time he meets Charles Xavier, bursting into an office saying, all right, I'm here, gents. Who's this bigwig you want me to meet? And Charles Xavier, of course, introduces himself and says that he's recruiting mutants. Wolverine listens to his pitch, and then the bigwig behind the desk, the Canadian guy, says, hey, wait, not so fast, fella. The government's invested a great deal of time and money turning you into what you are now. And, of course, Wolverine cuts his tie off and says he's resigning his commission effective immediately, and he goes on with Charles Xavier. Then Charles Xavier goes to recruit the Banshee, whose first appearance is in 1967, X-Men #28. Cut to Kenya, East Africa. Atop a lonely knoll, there stands a great stone portal. Men come to it in humility, their voices raised in praise and song and prayerful supplication. Aurora, great goddess of the storm, the voices cry, come unto us, ease our burden. And with a hollow peal of thunder and the moan of lonely winds, the storm goddess comes. Ladies and gentlemen, the first appearance of Storm. I am here, my children. What do you wish of me? There is drought upon the land, blessed one. Our crops wither, our grasses parch. 10 goats and chickens shall we slay in your honor if you will only bring us rain. Her eyes are crystal blue and older than time. They sparkle as she answers, save your beasts, my children. You need them more than I. I will do as you plead. Her liquid eyes grow dark. Then the sky grows dark as well. Okay, well, here's a little bit of something to think about. Her eyes grow dark, yet how we know her to be whenever she's using her powers, her eyes grow white. So that is a bit of a difference between first appearance and what we would come to know her as. Once more, the howling winds come up and sweep the storm goddess away. She soars aloft like an ebon bird, lightning landing from her fingertips, the glow of life shining full upon her face. She is happy here, only truly happy here, among the elements, and the raging sky, touched by her happiness, weeps. When the storm goddess returns to earth, at last her joy is shared by all. A most impressive display, Aurora, truly beautiful. Who are you? What business have you in Aurora Land? Coming soon to you, courtesy of Disney. I am called Xavier, and I have come to make you an offer I pray you will not refuse. An offer? What have you to offer a goddess? You have land, Aurora, and people who adore you. I offer you a world and people who may fear you, hate you, but people who need you nonetheless. The world I offer is not beautiful, but it is real, far more real than the fantasy you're living now. You are no goddess, Aurora. You are a mutant, and you have responsibilities. Come with me, child. Taste the world outside. You may find the flavor bitter or surprisingly sweet. You present a most peculiar assessment, yet I sense a deep sincerity in your words. All right, I will come with you. Perhaps the time has come for me to leave the nest at last. I don't know, considering she ends up living a life of violence and struggle and drama and such, she left a pretty good situation here. She may have gotten the shaft on this one. So then we see Charles Xavier try to recruit Sunfire, who made his first appearance in X-Men number 64 in 1970, and he goes to Mother Russia. Here we get the origin story of another one of the X-Men introduced in this book, but since Colossus will, as I've said before, get his own origin and first appearance, we're going to skip right on past this, and once again, I thank you for your patience. And of course, we're going to do the same for John Proudstar here, which I feel a little bit worse about him because I don't think that he's going to get his own video. Yikes. But nonetheless, this is about Storm, so moving on. Next, we join the team in the X-Mansion, and we see that they're all in full outfit and gear. Of course, Professor Xavier has to tell them that the uniforms do come from unstable molecules, which adjust themselves where necessary. I obtained them from a man named Reed Richards, and I'm certain you'll learn more of him and his friends later. But right now... And Sunfire gets mad at Professor X for wasting their time, and he says, I wasn't wasting your time, I was just waiting for Cyclops to come in so he could tell you what's going on. And Cyclops saying, hey, okay, well, if I'm going to tell you all about this, I need to take you to where it all began because the X-Men disappeared, and you're our only hope. Then we flash back to showing Cyclops and the rest of the X-Men surrounded by Professor Xavier, who's telling them that he discovered a very, very powerful mutant on the island of Krakoa, and he wants the X-Men to go and find him before that mutant falls into the wrong hands, so they get into their rocket, they start flying away. The X-Men find Krakoa, they land, and they're walking around thinking they don't actually know what they're looking for when something startles them, and as Psyche says, I never saw it coming, and it kind of flashes out. But Cyclops wakes up, he's back on the Stratojet, and for some reason his eyes cannot produce an optic blast, so he has no idea what's going on. He's trying to get control of the plane so he could go back and save his friends, but he can't, and it's taking him right back to Westchester. When he gets to the mansion, he bursts in and tells Professor Xavier exactly what happened and the fact that the X-Men are still trapped on Krakoa. While talking to Xavier, though, Xavier notices that Cyclops' eyes start glowing a little bit more and a little bit more until finally an optic blast just bursts out, and we find out that not only did his powers return, but they returned more powerful than before. So while Xavier went out to recruit the new X-Men, Cyclops stayed behind and retrained him, and he says, well, what we're going to do now is we're going to go to Krakoa, but Sunfire says, whoa, I'm not going with you, this is a fool's errand. Cyclops says to him, well, hey, man, you got an opportunity to help your fellow mutants. Sunfire says, well, I don't even like my fellow mutants, Cyclops, and I certainly will not risk my life to help them. Cyclops says, hey man, I feel sorry for you, but I don't have time to argue. Let's get the rest of the team on the jet. And that's when they're talking, Aurora saying that this is her first time viewing mutant camaraderie and she's not liking it. And Thunderbird saying, you know what, it's not a mutual admiration society. And while they're bickering and arguing, Sunfire comes up and says, are you going to open up the hatch? And somebody says, well, I'll be jiggered. It's the Jap. So, yeah, congratulations to the 70s. I'm sure that would fly these days. And Nightcrawler says to Sunfire, so the prodigal mutant returns. Why did you change your mind, Sunfire? I'm not doing a German accent, by the way. Afraid to go home alone? And Sunfire says, my reasons are nobody's business but my own, misfit. And you do well to remember that. So, yes, this is a team that's getting along just fine. So, Cyclops splits everybody off into teams. Not everybody's happy with their code name. Thunderbird's like, I'm Proudstar. And Cyclops is like, not anymore. Professor Xavier gave you a code name. Now, here's the teams. Storm and Colossus, you're coming in from the north. Banshee and Wolverine, you're coming in from the east. Sunfire and Nightcrawler. And Sunfire's like, no, not him. I don't want to come in through the south with him. And so everybody drops out of the plane, flyers carrying the non-flyers, yada, yada. You know the drill. Cut 2, Storm chiding Colossus for being so reckless and jumping out of the plane, saying, you can't fly. And he's like, I can land with the best of them. Then we see Proudstar and Cyclops together. They land the jet and just walk a few steps away from it, turn around and see that it's gone. The two also notice that there's a couple of temples that popped up and saying, well, Jet can't vanish and temples just can't show up out of nowhere. So they decide to go towards the temples, but are stopped by some living vines. Using, of course, their superpowers, they're able to get away from them and end up at the temple anyway. Cut back to Colossus and Storm, who see the same temple, and they're like, hey, let's go to this temple. And on their way, there's an avalanche that comes at them. Colossus is like, stand back, I'll protect you. Grabs a big old tree, starts baseballing them out of the way, but Aurora's like, hey, I'm not helpless, I can protect myself. And she uses the wind to blow the rocks into the ocean. They arrive at the temple, and Cyclops and Sunfire are like, hey, you made it, yay. And because they kind of want to be like a Silver Age Justice League, we cut to the other team of two where we see Banshee and Wolverine fighting crabs to get their way to the temple. Wolverine's like, they're not the only one with claws, shucka shucka, and Banshee, of course, uses his voice. And then they make it to the temple where the others are like, hey, you made it! And because repetition is good for the soul, I think, for some reason, we see Nightcrawler and Sunfire fighting big-ass bird. I almost said the bad word. Big old birds, I'll say. And they're bickering back and forth because Sunfire is really not a very likable character. And they beat the birds, and they're like, okay, now we made it to the temple. And they see the others, and they're like, hey, you made it! So the group looks for a way inside the temple. But when they can't find a way in, it's like, hey, you know what? Screw it, we're a whole bunch of mutants, let's just burst through the wall, and they do, only to find that their fellow X-Men are all tied up by vines and such. Oh my dear God, it's the other X-Men, and something seems to be feeding on them. So Cyclops says, for pity's sake, free them, what are we doing, we gotta help our friends. He doesn't actually say that. What he says is, well, don't just stand there staring at them, in pity's name, set them free. And Wolverine notes, cripes, what's going on? As soon as we pulled these tubes, the place started shaking. Quickly then, carry whoever is closest to you. And they start rushing out of the temple. And when they get outside onto the island, Angel says, you fool! Don't you understand? It wanted you to come back and bring others with you. It was all a trap, and now it's too late. The ground's rearing up around the fallen temple. Of course, haven't you realized yet? We came to the island to look for a mutant, but the mutant is the island itself. Images flood mutant minds as they stand rooted to the spot, the sunburst brilliance of an early atomic test, whose unseen radiation permeated every living organism here until they linked in a colony of intelligence that gave the island a life of its own. But Krakoa grew hungry. Then, a hunger barely appeased when the X-Men arrived upon the scene. Krakoa fed upon their mutant energies and grew hungrier still. Thus, it released one X-Men and sent him forth to find more food. which Cyclops did. Chapter 4, Krakoa, the island that walks like a man. So Cyclops is mad that he's been used, and Krakoa is like, hey, you're not the only one that I used. I used Professor Xavier too, except for he says the eyeless one and the legless one. And he says, and now he'll never go hungry again. And of course, the X-Men start attacking him, but finding out that their powers are not having any effect on the island. During the battle, Charles Xavier contacts Cyclops, says, hey, you're going about it the wrong way. I've realized a weakness that Krakoa has. Here's my plan. And then, of course, Professor Xavier himself joins the battle in a mental game versus Krakoa. And then we see Professor Xavier's plan pan out. We see him distracting Krakoa. Storm soars aloft on the wings of the wind. High above Krakoa, she hovers, slowly summoning to her Tempest-full electronic fury, then suddenly transmitting those seething energies to the lithe young woman who waits anxiously below, thus restoring the mighty magnetic powers of the girl called Lorna Dane. Within moments, the circuit is completed, and Lorna Dane screams in anguish as her physical limits are reached and exceeded. Don't stop, Lord, whatever you do, don't stop. This scares Havoc. You've got to call it off, Scott. Lorna can't take that kind of punishment. She'll be killed. Alex, I can't sacrifice a world to save one woman, even if she is the woman you love. I swear to you, brother, or no, if she dies. Xavier can't take any more of the battle, and he has to bow out. Cyclops, hoping that his plan works, he sees that Lorna is filled with energy. His mutant eyes narrow, and a single word forms upon his lips, now, and he and Havoc blast at Krakoa. This allows Polaris to use her new energies to fire straight into the earth, into the core beneath the island. The effects are felt by Krakoa immediately as he begins to fall apart, and the X-Men begin to search for their Stratojet. There's no way we could get far enough from the island before. Never let it be said, we Icemen aren't good for some things. Everybody get aboard fast. They all climb on a makeshift raft that Iceman has created, and Cyclops and Havoc use their energies to propel them away from the island as they see it rising into the air thanks to Polaris's energies, until, as it's described in the comic book, like soap through wet hands, the island bursts forth and flies into space. And that's when Cyclops notices that there's a whirlpool forming where the water is kind of rushing back into where the island was, and he orders Iceman to put up an airtight dome over our raft because that's our only chance to survive this miserable maelstrom. Voraciously, the great ice bubble is sucked into the wildly swirling maw, and those within are battered almost senseless against its cold, unfeeling walls. They voice their pain enthusiastically, and then they are gone. The seething waters swirl closed above their heads, and for a time the sea is calm. The minutes pass interminably. Then, the huge gleaming bubble bursts the water surface, and is itself burst in turn by a beam of scarlet fury. Fresh air, a warm sun, did you ever see anything more beautiful? Yeah, almost forgot the old Stratojet is watertight. Paddle on over while I go open the hatch. Shortly as the Stratojet streams skyward. Sorry we don't have seats for all of you, but the plane wasn't designed to carry so many mutants. Which brings us to our next little problem. What are we going to do with 13 X-Men? There you go, gang. That is the first appearance of Storm, as well as Nightcrawler, Colossus, and Thunderbird. I figure since she's sharing the book, and really she doesn't play a huge part in this story, I'm going to point out a little bit of her origin. It comes from issues 101, 2, and 3. Just like always, starting off with the cover, you know what? It's near perfect as well. Also, this is a classic cover. It's Phoenix Rising. This is the issue, like in the first one, she leads the plane down. They all think she's dead, and she comes bursting out of the water. That's basically the story here, but we're not really going to talk about that particular part of the story, as we're going to fast forward all the way to the end for the setup of issues 102 and 103. At the end of the issue, we see that Sean Cassidy, Banshee, is taking some of the X-Men, Wolverine, Colossus, Storm, and Nightcrawler to his family's castle. Storm's not very comfortable, So Banshee decides to show her around, show her her room, and he says, Banshee, you're so happy to be home, while I will only be happy the day I leave this castle forever. Jean would say Cassidy Keep has bad vibes for me. And it does, but I will not be ruled by my fears. I must force myself to relax. And I know precisely how to do it. For when the goddess of the storm wishes to refresh herself and calm her nerves, how better than by summoning her own summer shower? Gods, how I needed this. If I close my eyes, I can almost imagine myself back in Kenya. Oh, and by the way, just for the record, I have pointed out before this, I don't know, fetish that Dave Cockrum had of drawing Storm naked with only her hair covering her naughty bits. Yeah, thank you, Dave. But of course, they have a formal dinner to go to, and Aurora knows this, so she gets dressed, and she's visited by Nightcrawler, who shows her his image inducer, so he doesn't have to walk around looking like a blue furry elf. And he goes through Clark Gable, Bing Crosby, Groucho Marx, and then just settles on what looks like Tony Stark and says, Aurora, you're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. And she says, if that is true, then thank you. And they all meet up for dinner. Wolverine is dressed up and he's looking at Sean and he's saying, hey, how come we're going to a formal dinner and you're dressed like a stable boy? And Sean's like, I'm the Lord of the Castle. I can do what I want. And while they're walking, the trapdoor opens and Sean Cassidy's like, hey, we got to switch to our costumes. And for some reason he does too. And I know he has sound powers, but I never knew he had switch instantly to my costume powers. And we see the villains for the next 2 issues. It's Black Tom Cassidy and Juggernaut. And yes, Black Tom Cassidy is a racist name. I'm just kidding. That's Deadpool 2. Anyway, he starts explaining to Banshee about how they're trapped in the dungeons of Cassidy Craig and or Crag. And this triggers Aurora, who realizes that she has no way out of this enclosed space. This triggers her claustrophobia, and she flips right out. Wolverine says as much. Next issue, who shall stop the Juggernaut? Okay, I said I was going to talk about all of the covers. This one, too, is a classic. I mean, this series is just filled with classic covers. I'm not a big fan of the way Colossus and Juggernaut look here. They look a lot smaller than they actually should be, and I kind of figure that's to make space for the words X-Men and Who Shall Stop the Juggernaut. That's the only thing. It just looks like the scale is off, especially when you take into account the swinging chandelier that Nightcrawler is attached to. Classic, yeah, but it's not the best. Okay, so I'm not going to lie to you. We're going to talk about Storm's origin here. There's a lot of story, but it's really Storm's origin that we're interested in. Remember, Storm is now trapped. She's flipping out because she's claustrophobic. She cannot move. She's in a panic while the rest of the team is getting their tail kicked. While Colossus is going at it with Juggernaut, Black Tom Cassidy's pointing out the fact that, look, Juggernaut's more powerful than all of you, and I'm immune to your superpowers, so what are you going to do? And Banshee's like, yeah, okay, I'm going to beat the tar out of you with my bare hands, and he leaps onto Black Tom Cassidy. And the fight continues. Wolverine gets mad at Colossus and grabs onto him. Colossus is like, hey, don't touch me, and Wolverine's like, whatever, and then throws Colossus into the Juggernaut. This causes Colossus to argue with Wolverine, so he turns to Wolverine, starts yelling and screaming, and Juggernaut takes that chance to basically knock Colossus out from behind, and that's when Wolverine tries to attack the Juggernaut, of course with no avail. Nightcrawler recognizes the fact that the only person who can really stand a chance, the only person who's got the power to even put a dent into Juggernaut is Storm, but all she does is huddle in a corner and cry, Storm, Aurora, snap out of it, woman. Kurt, please, we're being murdered, Storm. Why won't you help? And, of course, Juggernaut attacks him while she's still cowering. Nightcrawler gets away from Juggernaut, so he figures, well, if I can't kill him, I'll kill her. He picks her up and says, I'll take the girl's life instead. Let her go, Butcher, lest you discover how much of a demon Nightcrawler truly is. And he throws her to the side. My pleasure, Spock ears. The girl isn't worth the effort anyway. And Aurora thinks to herself, damn you, Aurora. These are your friends being killed, your friends who cry out for you to you for aid. And what is your reply? I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. And then she remembers. A twisting in her mind as Storm's scream tears open long sealed doors, unlocking memories of an alien time and place, of New York, of Harlem, in the summer of 1951. You remember it all now, don't you, Aurora, though you were only 6 months old? So long, 112th Street. I hope I never see you again. Happy, hun? And why not? I'm going home, David, though Cairo is 2,000 miles north of Kenya. You know, I sometimes wonder where David Monroe, aspiring photojournalist, got the nerve to ask an African princess to marry him. From love, perhaps. That's where I got the courage to say yes. Look at Aurora. She's only a baby, and she looks like she understands every word we're saying. She does, David, because she's very special. I knew that from the instant of her conception. Time cut. 5 years up the line to Cairo in that fateful year of 1956, the year of the Suez War. Nasser had nationalized the canal, you see, and then the British and the French governments, in concert with the Israelis, had responded by invading Egypt. In a matter of days, the three-pronged attack had Egypt on the ropes, and Allied aircraft roamed the Suez skies at will. The French are bombing the main highway, and our house is way too close to their target for comfort. We've got to get out of here, Nader, fast. We'll head into the city. I'll leave you at the American Embassy. Don't worry, love. Everything's going to work out just fine. But as David Monroe hustled his family away from the window, a French Vautour fighter bomber caught a flak burst as it swung into its strafing run. The pilot ejected, was taken prisoner, and repatriated after the war. His plane went down with a full load of fuel and bombs. Oh my God! Nader, Aurora, get down! I'll keep you safe. Liar. Darkness and pain, eventually of body and soul, pain that would not be ignored as it forced you awake. Mother? Mother! I'm not going to scream that loud, but yes, she looks like she's very scared she just lost her family. There was darkness again, blessed nothingness, but when you awakened, your mother's body was gone, and you were alone with rock and rubble jammed in close around you, sealing you in. Somehow, though, you managed to pull yourself free. You haunted the gutters and back alleys for a time until some of Ahmed El-Jabbar's urchins found you. The old man took you in and taught you how to survive. Within a year, you were the finest beggar sneak thief in all of Cairo. But then in your 12th year, some inner need began pulling you south away from Egypt and the Sahara. You walked for a year, 2,000 miles from Cairo to the Serengeti Plain, and though you'd never seen the veldt before, you knew you had come home. There you had remained the girl growing into a woman, all memories of your past life fading with the passage of the years, content in your solitude, until Charles Xavier had come to lead the goddess from her nest. A notion away, that self-same Professor Xavier stirred. What? I thought I heard someone call my name, but so faint, so far away. It's Storm! Images flooding my senses through the telepathic rapport I share with my students. I can feel her pain and fear, and dominating her every thought is the face of Cain Marco. So Xavier bursts in and tells Cyclops that they have to go, but he refuses to leave Jean's side after her accident. The two fight for a while about responsibilities, but then Professor Xavier sees a strange face in the mirror, one that he's seen in his dreams before. And the battle still rages over at the Cassidy Castle, with Juggernaut just ponying the X-Men. Finally, he knocks Wolverine out. This causes Nightcrawler to yell for him and get Cain Marco's attention again. Nightcrawler lands a lucky blow, which manages to hurt the Juggernaut. Black Tom Cassidy sees this and fires an energy beam from his staff into Nightcrawler's back, knocking him out into the shadows. And I love the art here that shows, of course, that Nightcrawler disappears in the shadows. Great touch. And I kid you not, Leprechaun save Nightcrawler from the battle. They pull him away through a trap door. We see Black Tom Cassidy get the best of Banshee, and he says, you should have asked the right questions, like who freed Juggernaut and me from prison, and who paid us to kill the X-Men. And he delivers a blow saying, it's such a pity you will die without ever knowing. So with Banshee knocked out, Juggernaut says that's awesome, great, but he really wants to get revenge on Xavier, and Colossus rallies himself and says to get to Xavier, you're going to have to go through Colossus. And the two fight so hard that they manage to knock down walls, even looking as if they're about to entomb Storm and bury her just like she had happened to her as a child. Storm realizes she's the last one left, that she failed her teammates by being scared so much she fires an energy bolt at it. And there's something that I forgot that Juggernaut could do. He takes that energy and redirects it right back at Storm, knocking her out, leaving him to say, Charles Xavier will walk into our death trap as meek and defenseless as lamb to the slaughter. And that ends X-Men 102 and the origin of Storm. So there you go, gang. That is the origin and the first appearance of Storm. What did you think? Let me know in the comments below. Now, I know I said I was going to go through 103, but there's actually no more origin left. It's just the ending of this story. Unfortunately, the video's already hit 30 minutes, and I wanted to do this under 30 minutes, so I'm going to have to lop off this end. And I highly recommend you guys go check this out for yourself. It's a lot of fun. These are some great issues of X-Men, the best issues of X-Men in a lot of people's minds. From here on out to about issue 200, you got to check these out. It's amazing. So anyway, what did you think? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to click like, share, subscribe if you haven't done it already, and more importantly, hit that notification bell so you don't miss anything. Well, that depends on if YouTube decides to share even with people who pick notified. I apologize for landing on my particular, actually I don't. But anyway, that's what's going on. The Adpocalypse. And speaking of the Adpocalypse, if you don't mind helping out this channel, we've got Ko-Fi, we've got Patreon. The links are in the description below. On Ko-Fi, I started doing commission, so if there's a hero you want to hear about in Comic Book Origins, go on over. I do commissions now for videos, of course. So, yeah, check that out. Go on over to the Amazon store, and that you could buy something there. And if you do that, you get something. You help out the channel, and the world's a happy place. Thank everybody who's already done that, and to everyone, all of the true believers, thank you very, very much for watching.